Next, we have Jim Wallace, Carrie Ann Auclair, and Mike Harris. Testimony on H2312 and act relative to ghost guns. And maybe a few more.
You're up, kid.
Okay. Hi, thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. My name is Carrie Ann Auclair. I am the Advocacy Director for GOAL and the Women's Program Assistant. I'm also the State Director for Armed Women of America, the DC Project, and I'm an NRA instructor. And I'm a mom. I'm here to discuss Bill H2403, relative to carrying a firearm while on a recreational vehicle. I have been ATVing with my family since they were 5 and 6. We've enjoyed the very awesome outdoors that we have the privilege of using across our street. As a woman, as a mom, I have a great responsibility to protect my family and myself. And that includes when I'm ATVing across the street or anywhere else in our Commonwealth. But for some reason, that ability is taken away from me when we are enjoying the great outdoors on an ATV. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Safety concerns. One can easily argue that carrying a firearm on a snow vehicle or recreational vehicle can be essential for personal safety and self-defense, especially in a remote or wilderness areas where law enforcement may not be readily available. Right here in Massachusetts, there have been too many incidences where women being raped, murdered, while trying to enjoy the outdoors. There has been many stories where women have survived, and unfortunate stories where women did not. Hunter assistance. Hunters often use snow vehicles and ATVs to transport game after a harvest. How does operating one of these vehicles suddenly nullify their civil rights? Responsible gun owners. Responsible gun owners understands the importance of safety, firearm handling, and storage. When we are not a threat to public society, we are not an issue. We are not the issue, and should have the freedom to carry a firearm on these vehicles for self-defense, just like we do in our cars, in our homes. What is the difference? Existing laws, Chapter 90B, Section 26G, lowercase g. Regulations are in place to ensure firearm safety transport. These include regulations for firearms to be unloaded and encased in closed case, with addressed concerns about accidental discharge. As a responsible gun owner, I am the most vetted citizen because I am required to do background checks. I should have a right to carry a firearm on an ATV to protect myself and my family. Second Amendment civil rights. As a strong advocate of our civil rights, our Second Amendment, the law is important to preserving the rights and for citizens to keep and bear arms. Responsible firearm ownership is a fundamental aspect of these rights. Okay. Thank you.
All right, good. All right, good afternoon. My name is Mike Harris. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Gun Owners, actually. I almost gave myself a promotion there by accident. I'm happy for the opportunity to speak before the committee today. Thank you. This is quite the list of bills, and some of them are kind of doubled efforts, so I'm just going to kind of refer to subject matter rather than specific bills. But I want to first say the most frustrating phrase as of late in our organization has been responsible gun owners are not the problem. We hear it over and over again against this crazy backdrop of an onslaught of brand new laws that do nothing but restrict responsible gun owners and treat us like the problem. So, it's a little nuts. But first I want to talk a little bit about criminal firearms and trafficking. It's one of the subjects for today. And Section 5 of Chapter 284 of the Acts of 2014, it was actually Goal's language that created the Criminal Firearms and Trafficking Division of the State Police. And its purpose was to assist the offices of the Attorney General and District Attorneys in the investigation and prosecution of state firearms crimes. But to our knowledge, that unit does not currently operate or even exist. So we would recommend that it be fully funded and implemented and kind of a little bit expanded. And if anybody would like to have some conversations about that, we can certainly do that. In addition, to complement the creation of that special police unit, we had additional language in Chapter 284 that addressed possession of deceptive weapons, transporting, breaking and entering, PSAs, public service announcements, are a big part of it. And then moving on to ghost guns. The right to build one's own gun and in their own home for their own personal use has been a protected right in the United States since the 1600s. The term ghost gun is just another political term with a flexible definition used to scare people. All the issues surrounding ghost guns are already illegal. It's illegal to sell a gun to an unlicensed person or a prohibited person. It's illegal to use a gun in a crime. And it is illegal to sell certain guns if you are an FFL in Massachusetts. Even if you have a federal firearms license, you still can't sell certain firearms. So new laws restricting responsible gun owners who already own firearms would be kind of redundant and ineffective at reducing crime. Once again, responsible gun owners are not the problem. It could be beneficial, however, if we decided to increase penalties on those found to be illegally selling and transferring guns to get an actual definition of what a ghost gun is. We've heard anything from, a 3D printed gun all the way to a firearm with a scratched off serial number. So, getting a real definition of what a ghost gun is, put into law if we want to do that, would be beneficial. So I think I can call it that.
That's dangerous. House 2376, Act relative to the change of address for firearm licensing. As far as I know in Massachusetts, the Second Amendment is the only civil right that you will be denied if you don't report that you've moved. I've never understood this. Your license follows you no matter where you go. But if you don't notify, and in Massachusetts, you actually have to notify the chief of police that you're leaving, the chief of police you're going to, and the state by certified mail. And if you don't, you lose your civil rights. Why? There's no other civil right that you lose by moving and not telling the government. I'm a lawful licensed gun owner. My license follows me wherever I go. There's absolutely no purpose in this. The next piece is House 2332, an act relative to electronic defensive devices. Several years ago, there was a Supreme Court case that came out of Massachusetts called Catano. And it was about a woman who happened to be homeless that had an abusive boyfriend that would visit her at her place of employment. And somebody gave her a stun gun because most of the rest of the country, those are over-the-counter products, as long as you're 18 years old. So she thought nothing of it. When he showed up at her place of employment and threatened her, she brandished it, and she was arrested and charged under a felony clause with possession of an electronic weapon. Went all the way to the United States Supreme Court after Massachusetts court declined that it was part of the Second Amendment. And you're on the right side of this when Ruth Bader Ginsburg writes a decision that says, no, this is a protected device under the Second Amendment, and you will change your laws. Unfortunately, the laws that were changed, they're a disaster. They were actually put under the definition of handgun in Massachusetts, which they don't belong there, period. Because a stun gun sometimes can be a $30 item. If it breaks, throw it in the trash. Now it's a handgun. You can't throw handguns in the trash, at least in my house, but maybe other places. So that definitely needs to be rewritten. The next piece is House 2392, an act relative to the return of firearms. And very simply, what happens in Massachusetts is if you're accused of something, not proven guilty, just accused of something, and the police confiscate your guns, many of the local cities and towns have contracts with what's called a bonded warehouse. Before you even knew what happens, though your property is now stored in a bonded warehouse, and from minute one, you're incurring fees. And most people, sometimes, if anybody up here is an attorney, it could take years to settle something that you're just accused of and didn't commit. So what's happening is they accrue fees for a year, 2 years, whatever, and the fees become higher than the value of the property. I cannot find another instance in Massachusetts where something is taken out of your house and handed to a third party, which you're indebted to once it gets there. That needs to change.
Thank you for your testimony. I have a couple of questions. When you refer to that specific issue, what bill is before us on that specific issue?
The storage, the bonded warehouses?
Correct.
That is 2392. And the other problem with that, because of Massachusetts' convoluted laws, the bonded warehouses have to be licensed as a retailer or something like that, a firearm retailer. There are a lot of guns, because of our convoluted laws, that are perfectly legal to own, but once it's on the books of a retailer, they cannot transfer back that particular property.
Okay. Thank you. When it comes to illegal gun owners or people that have guns illegally, I strongly support you and your efforts that they should face the burden of the law as much as possible, right? But does somebody that has the right to have and receive a license in Massachusetts, a legal gun owner, does that officially make him or her a responsible gun owner?
Well, in light that we are probably the most vetted people in this state, you would at least hope that that's the case, because that means they haven't done anything in their life that was, well, could be considered stupid. And actually, we, as GOAL, the NRA, and other organizations, USCCA, one of the reasons Massachusetts has one of the lowest accidental gun deaths in the country is because of us. It's not because of the state. The state literally does not spend a penny on firearm safety education. That entire effort is on the gun owners ourselves to provide that education. Gun Owners Action League, for instance, a state-level association, probably the only state association in the country that has a full-time trainer. And that's all we do is provide firearm safety training out there. The other thing that we have to provide, unfortunately, one of our most popular classes is mass gun law for citizens, because they're so convoluted the average citizen can't understand. So I would say that in light of the data that's out there and in light of the background checks, yeah, I think we're probably the most responsible people out there. Okay. If you compare that to deaths on the highway in Mass, I think the latest number was 450 dead on our state highways versus 0 accidental deaths with guns, and there's only 5 times more driver's licenses than there are gun licenses.
Thank you. And for the sake of time, if we could just get through some of these questions as rapidly as possible, but do you agree that legal gun owners have been irresponsible with their weapons? It's basically yes or no, at some point. I'm not saying statistically more than others, I'm just saying, but that is...
I mean, that's a broad question that should not have a broad answer. Okay. Because is there a very incredibly small minority that might have been irresponsible? Yep. Sure.
1%. Okay.
I don't even think it's 1%.
But do we know that there's legal gun owners that are committing suicide?
Oh, I'm sure there are.
Right, and it's a mental health crisis, and that's an issue that needs to be addressed, and we emphasize with that as well.
And that's why the red flag law is so broken.
There's also statistics that prove, or statistics that would state that legal gun owners have committed some horrendous crimes and mass massacres in this country that have been legally purchased their weapons. Recently in New Hampshire or Maine, I believe it was, right? So there is a crisis with the use of guns illegally, and that needs to be addressed, and bills that will come before our committee when that happens will address. But we also need to recognize that there is some issues we need to resolve when it comes to legal gun owners that have been proven to be irresponsible.
Well, in fairness, Mr. Chairman, most of the events that you're talking about, like Lewiston, Maine, was a systemic failure of the government.
Right.
That man was a prohibited person. He was actually in a mental health facility. The military asked him to go there. When he was released, the state of Maine did nothing to follow up with him. And that's the problem I have with the red flag bill. Because if the red flag bill identifies a potential mass killer, all we do is take their gun license away and send them home? That's insane. Okay. So it's a systemic problem, both with mental health, and you run the gamut. Ever since Newtown, I have been talking nonstop about the gap in mental health. And the problem is when we identify people, usually they get medicated up, released with no follow-up, and that's when something bad really happens. People, let me say this, 99.99% of people who have whatever variety or level of mental health problems are not a threat. Most of them are more likely to become victims. There is that extraordinarily small percentage, though, that are incredibly dangerous. And because we don't want to put a stigma on them, we just let them walk amongst us. There is a small, very tiny, minute group of people who simply cannot walk amongst us safely. And we need to address that.
And I totally agree with you. I think we're in agreement with that. I think a lot of individuals are. Also, when it comes to the use of illegal weapons, how does a gun that's been manufactured and has a serial number become an illegal weapon? It's because it's sold illegally, correct?
Well, some of them can be stolen. Some of them can be,
right.
Straw purchased. One of the popular things in Massachusetts is the illicit trade guns for drugs. Wherever those two things come from, it's quite an illicit trade here. And as a matter of fact, we have a bill, I think it's in judiciary, that would bring the level of punishment possible up to life in prison for trafficking guns and drugs at the same time. And the problem is, just like Mike talked about, Gun Owners actually has been working for 25 years to try to address these issues. But every time we pass more laws, they're not utilized. I personally drafted that law that created the Criminal Firearms and Trafficking Division. Doesn't exist. As far as gun safety goes, when the 2014 bill passed, when I met with then Speaker DeLeo and told him the state doesn't spend a penny on firearm safety, he asked me, what can we do? And I said, how about start with some PSAs from the state police about storage and training? It's in the law. Have we seen it? No. Okay. I drafted 3 separate sections of law on trafficking guns, breaking and entering to steal guns, guns coming across state lines used in crime. Have they been used? I doubt it. So here we are talking about passing more laws that are not going to be used. Meanwhile, the people I represent are being made out to be the bad guys.
Jim, so I want to go back to my question. So a gun that's sold legally becomes illegally because whether it's drug trade, whatever. But there was a legal gun that becomes illegal,
sure.
Right? So why are we against to track and trace that weapon?
Well, let me ask you a question. When was the last time a crime was solved in this state that led to a conviction in prison time by tracing a serial number?
Well, I'm just saying that that's a problem. It has it. So
right.
So
because once it's in
why are
criminal
we
hands,
against track and tracing of a weapon? Because if legal gun owners are responsible, they wouldn't sell a weapon.
Sure.
Or if it was stolen, they will report it.
Sure, which we do.
Then that way we would be when a crime is done, we would know where that gun traced back to.
Yeah.
Why are we against? So we're not against that, correct?
We've been doing that forever.
Thank you.
So
we have a lot in common.
Yeah.
So the fact that none of this legislation takes away the right for anybody to continue to purchase weapons in Massachusetts.
None of this legislation?
Except, I'm going to the except,
Yeah.
specific weapons that, and switches and other mechanisms that would make a gun, a magazine, attach a magazine weapon. But other than that, none of the laws that are before us today takes away unless those specific items that I just mentioned now takes away anybody's right to buy weapons or carry weapons.
No, I would disagree with that. I'd
No?
be happy to go through the list with you.
Okay, so we'll have a
off-record,
conversation after, because I
yeah.
don't want to take a lot
Yeah.
of time, but I do want to, Senator, please.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your appearance today, Ms. Auclair, Mr. Harris, Mr. Wallace. A couple of quick questions, and obviously take as long as you want to answer the questions. Red flags. Now, Jim, you talked earlier about we need to improve them here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Well, first of all, I believe the process is unconstitutional because your civil rights are stripped before you even know what happened. Somebody shows up at your door and says there's a court order against you, you have to surrender your license and your property before you even know what you've been accused of. But once you're in the process, there's a kind of a parallel or two-prong approach. One is to find the next killer, and the other is to find somebody who's suicidal. So let's take the next killer, for example. Somebody files a petition, says, hey, I think this person's really dangerous. Well, first of all, if they don't legally own a gun, you can't file a red flag, because red flags are only about licensed gun owners. So there's a problem there. Just because you don't own a gun doesn't mean you're not extremely dangerous. So you bring this person through the petition process, go to court, go through the legal process. The court said, yeah, this one is trouble. All we do is take away their gun license and send them home? Can they work in a school? Can they work in a chemical factory, drive a tractor trailer full of gasoline? Remember, Timothy McVeigh never used a gun, killed over 100 people. There is no follow-up. There's no dangerousness hearing. There's no Section 12 72-hour evaluation. Nothing. We've identified a killer and let them walk out the door. That's insane in its own self. Now, suicide, on the other hand, and this is pretty close to home. 2 years ago, I lost my 15-year-old great-nephew to suicide by hanging. And the red flag bill supposedly identifies somebody who's suicidal. You drag them into court, probably exacerbating their mental health issue, whatever it might be. Court agrees, yes, this person's a danger to themselves. You take away their gun license, hand them a pamphlet, and send them home. That is insane again. Suicide in Massachusetts by hanging is almost more than guns, drugs, and poisons combined. So they're going to go home and they're going to hang themselves. So the red flag bill is not a solution. It's actually a really dangerous precedent. That entire process needs to be reviewed. And if we're going to continue to do something, it has to include everybody, not just licensed gun owners. Otherwise, that's all it's about. It's taking people's licenses away and not solving issues that we desperately need to solve.
Thank you. Also, whoever would like to take this question, love to hear it, the answers. Let's take away the confines of any one bill that we've talked about. We've had a lot of bills, all well-intentioned.
Sure.
Any suggestions that any of you might have would be willing to offer now in ways that we can combat crime by illegal use of guns?
Got to start from scratch.
Okay.
The current laws are so convoluted, the average person, even the average prosecutor, doesn't understand them. We at Gun Owners Action League, believe it or not, actually teach law enforcement on the Massachusetts gun laws. How insane is that? There's a retired police chief that writes a 420-page book on what you need to know as a Massachusetts gun owner. 420 pages. We actually coined a phrase for ourselves in Massachusetts that we're all felons in waiting. Because at any time, you can trip up and violate something that will make you a felon unwittingly. And I will say that, and you should all have it, we gave you all copies of our report. The myth that the Massachusetts gun laws have kept us safe in Massachusetts is just that, a myth. If you compare Massachusetts to Massachusetts, for this particular conversation, I don't care how we compare to Texas. In 1998, there were about 62 gun-related homicides in Massachusetts. The last numbers from the Department of Public Health, which you should have there, they went up 111%. How is that a success? How is that leading the country? Again, I don't care how we compare to other states. How do we compare where we were 25 years ago? Massachusetts, it's actually an incredibly dangerous state. If you just talk about violent crime and adjust for population, Massachusetts is the most violent state in Northeast America. That's ridiculous. But we hide behind this wall of, wow, we have the lowest gun death rate in the country. You know how they get to that number? They include suicides and accidents. The accidents are almost zero, and that's us. The suicides aren't because of the gun laws. It's because we have an incredible, as bad as it is, an incredible access to health care in Massachusetts. Has nothing to do with the gun laws. The gun laws are an absolute failure. They do nothing to help the inner cities. All they do is keep us on our tiptoes that we may be a felon in waiting. The criminals could care less about this stuff.
One last question. We've talked about this in meetings that we've had. I know you've obviously met with Chair Gonzalez and many members of the legislature. Data collection. Could you please expound upon your positions on data collection?
This was probably pre-COVID. Senator Cream and actually some of the moms came to me and said, hey, we have a data collection bill. Would you take a look at it? Sure. Brought it back to the office, went through it with the staff. There was only one piece that we didn't think was particularly good because it relied on gathering data from FFLs across the country, which you're not going to do. But we actually took that bill and expanded upon it greatly. So there's a lot more data that we're asking for because we get those questions all the time. You know, where'd the gun come from? Was it actually in criminal hands? You know, some of the stuff that Chairman Gonzalez talked about in trying to figure out what's really going on. How many times are Bartley Fox actually being utilized? Are the other criminal laws being utilized? So I'm all in favor of gathering data. We just have to be very careful about how we're getting it. And one example I gave to Senator Cream was, you got to be careful on the federal level, especially with ATF data, because a crime gun under the ATF is any gun that's been traced. And that might be simply a widow who called the police and said, can you come get these? I don't want them. First thing they're going to do is trace them to make sure they're not Mike's. And right away, they're labeled a crime gun, and then the retailer who legally sold them is now labeled a crime gun dealer. And what we found years ago when they put out the numbers was 70 to 75% of crime guns were never used in a crime. They were just simply traced.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to go back to specific questions. When it comes to handguns or rifles, what is a percentage in Massachusetts that are sold? Is it more handguns than rifles, or what?
We'd have to talk to Firearms
Okay,
Record
so
Bureau.
I did speak to them, and they told me 80% are handguns.
Yep.
Okay, so a lot of the bills that are before us has nothing to do with handguns. In addition to that, rifles that are being sold, but the ones that some of the legislation is banning really comes out, and again, my statistics could be totally wrong, you guys are the experts, not I, is approximately 1% of sales of the guns that are so-called being banned in Massachusetts, or 1%, according to gun dealers.
The bill that bans all semi-automatics would ban everything from a junior .22 rifle to a semi-automatic handgun. No, period, just semi-automatic. Doesn't matter, it doesn't have to have a detachable magazine. There are many firearms out there, whether rifles, shotguns, or whatever, turkey guns, duck guns, .22 plinking guns, handguns used for competition, that would just simply wipe out everything that we have.
Right. What percentage of guns do you know?
Semi-automatics?
Yes.
I just take a guess at probably 80%.
Well, there's 80% of firearms are sold handguns. There can't be 80% left. It's supposed to be something between 20%, right?
Well, not all handguns are semi-automatic.
Right.
So what's the percentage of that? See, here we're getting into the nitty-gritty of, once again, in my eyes, we're trying to justify, or at least the state's trying to justify, more restrictions on the people I represent, which are the most lawful people in the state. What does anybody here care what I own?
Well, all due respect,
Yeah.
Jim,
Yeah.
again, I just was talking about statistics, not
Yeah.
taking away anybody's rights. But thank you very much for
Sure.
your answer.
Yep.
Any other members? Go ahead. Rep. Saros.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find this fascinating, and I go back to Rep. Vieira's comments earlier, where once we're done with this, you know, I hope that we all want our state to be safer and, you know, bring the groups together, to your point earlier, and work on this. But as lawmakers now, I just wanted to follow up with two things. The bonded warehouse issue, I'm glad you brought that up. As a former police officer, a lot of times we did that because we had no place to store these weapons,
Right. Yeah.
especially smaller departments. Many of the weapons are expensive, and you didn't want them to rust or whatever, so we would send them to places that would professionally deal with that. But that's a good point to bring up. But more importantly, earlier, sir, you talked about the state police unit. I want to know more about that.
Yeah.
Like, why is that not happening, and why are we not putting out
The-
PSAs and things like that?
One of the original concepts behind that was, again, going back to all of the issues, the 420-page laws that we have to deal with, you know, to some extent, some law enforcement, DAs that are overly aggressive are wasting their time on us. You know, you didn't have the right license for the magazine. Yeah, but he was a lawful person. Why are you wasting time? So it was to actually, the other piece of it is to create what we call a state-level firearms crime. Something, a crime of violence or has drugs involved, you know, rises to that level that this unit would then work with either the Attorney General's office or the local DAs. And one of the important things, Chairman Gonzalez, was if you have one unit across the state dealing with these high-level crimes, they're all going to need locals' help and everything else. Now you have a central depository for all of these crimes, and they're very quickly going to come up with common denominators, who's involved, who are the key figures. But when you have so many DAs, so many police departments, I know the AG is trying to do some stuff, but they're all sort of working separately. That was the theory behind this. The problem was, and this is actually the problem with everything in the 2014 bill, was never funded. All of the school safety laws that we worked with you to pass were never funded, were never implemented. None of the school security stuff was ever done. The state police unit was never put in place. Oh, I think it lasted 1 year. The public service announcements, never put in place. So that frustrates us a lot when we're going through what we're going through this year in this building. But yet we've worked successfully for nearly 25 years to give the state the tools, and they're leaving those tools to rust.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you. Rep. Vieira.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I'm correct, I think Chair Timilty and I were the only ones that were here to go through those 5 rounds of hearings in the 2014 bill. And when that passed...
Does that make us old?
No, it makes us frustrated
Yeah.
that 9 years later, two administrations from both political parties,
Yep.
3 that I worked directly with and then I gave up, quite frankly, 3 colonels of the state police. Where's the report? Because there was the unit and then there was the reporting requirement.
Right.
And the Sportsman's Council, caucus that I founded, we wanted the reports. What's the data? Because everybody's saying we're finally going to get the data. And it's that little line at the end of every section, Jim, that you spoke of.
Subject
to the appropriation.
Yeah.
And guess what? Everybody wants a new playground in their backyard in April
Yeah.
when it's time to do the budget. So I think it's time, and I'm gonna stand up and say I'm going to be part of this in April, because quite frankly I did give up because we didn't have it. But you know what? I'm going to stand up, and I want folks in the Democratic aisle, I want folks in the Republican aisle, and I want our unenrolled member to stand up and say we need to fund the mechanisms that since 2014 we put in the law so we could address the issue. And we haven't.
All that work went to waste.
And we haven't.
Yeah.
And now our chair, Timothy, is on the Senate side, so we have a partner that went through that together in 2014. And so I know that the senator and I, as well as our House chair, we should have some more conversations about this, regardless of what comes out of this other sort of universe of a gun bill. We've got some things on the books already that we need to fund.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because at the so-called listening tour, which I'm pretty sure they had earplugs in, there was a member of the moms, his name is Patrick, I think he was in his 70s, retired doctor, victim of a gunshot wound, and he stood up and asked the Judiciary Chair, this is in the law. Where's the data? How can you tell me it's not there when it's in the law? Later on, I went and spoke to Patrick, introduced myself, and I said, you're going to lose a lot of sleep if you're going to count the laws that aren't enforced or put in place that have already been passed.
And to be very brief, just to follow up on Rep. Vera's very cogent points, Representative, my office has already started working on that, and look forward to working with you on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Vilas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony today. I guess the first thing that I would say, too, is kind of just a word of admonition or caution for everyone in that. You know, we've spent a lot of time talking about the Barun decision, and we're not that far off, as many people are aware. You know, just recently, the oral arguments in the United States versus Rahimi opinion, where I think you're going to get everything from prohibited offenders, domestic violence, and I do believe that they will go into red flag logs as well. There's been a lot of surmise that they will in fact do that. So just kind of a word of that we very well could have a landmark United States Supreme Court opinion coming down very, very soon that may, I don't know if call into question is the right word, but certainly impact much of what we're doing today. But pushing that aside, I wanted to get back. Because as you heard my first question, I talked about kind of that, if in fact you were here when I had my first question about some of kind of the other drivers of gun violence, or kind of this other gun violence that's going on, which sometimes I question, you know, laws on the books and proposed laws, their ability to impact those. But I think if you forced me to come up with an area where it may have an impact on some of that, it would be in that ghost gun space, in the selective device, the Glock switches, things of that nature.
Yep.
And pardon me, some of your thoughts on the ghost gun stuff. That I really kind of want to. It was a little bit vague. You certainly weren't being intentionally vague, but just kind of your thoughts.
There should be a 2-pager that everybody should have that we put together for you yesterday. And the first thing is, as far as the people I represent, the lawful gun owners, there's no such thing as a ghost gun. We build a gun, we have to report it, period. End of story. So your problem is with criminals who may be building things. So, matter of fact, in the last legislative session, this committee released Gold's ghost gun bill first with a favorable report, because it hammers the bad people that are doing this. Now, after discussions with you, Senator, and some of the police, they're also concerned about parts, because one officer said if we have a warrant to go into a house for drugs, we may find Glock switches, but not guns. So we amended the bill that we have now, and basically what it does is, if you're a prohibited person and you are in possession of gun parts, and we specifically included trigger assemblies, frames, receivers, whatever it might be, but you have to be a prohibited person, put them away. Please, put them away. That's what this tool would do. But would it, again, be used? So that our bill leaves us alone, because we're not a threat. We can legally build our own guns. We legally report them once they're built. And the criminals are causing the issue. So let's hammer the criminals together. Let's go get them.
I just want to make sure I understand your position correctly. It's that we should, are you in that respect, are you distinguishing between prohibited?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if they're a prohibited person in possession of any gun part, go get them.
But my understanding is that Glock switches right now are prohibited via federal law, correct?
Yeah, it's a crime to even have them. So, well, I don't know if it includes the federal machine gun stuff, but that's pretty rare. So, yeah, FOPA, yeah. So it's, but yeah, so it's, again, we are not the problem. So let's get together and go after the bad guys.
For anyone to want one of these Glock switch devices?
Well, I mean,
I don't-
for us, to be honest with you, if they were available on the range, they're just fun to shoot. But if you're a criminal, there's a whole different purpose, right? Yeah. So again, it's trying to combine two different worlds for the same problem, and it's not going to work. And it hasn't worked for 25 years, so why would it work now? But yeah, if they're a prohibited person, a Glock switch turns something into a machine gun, which should initiate federal prosecution. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to ask this question and also provide an statement. There is a huge difference between using data and statistic responsibly to persuade the legislators, and using data, manipulating data to fit the mold that you want to use to come to us and try to sell your statement. And that's, to me, that's insulting. I believe the work of many state representatives back in 2098 that represent at least 40,000 people, senators that represent at least 20,000 plus residents to make Massachusetts safer, and for you to manipulate the data and tell Massachusetts and us and everybody that we represent that the law accomplishes nothing. That's an insult of the work we do every day to make Massachusetts a safer place. And I can tell you, I do statistics, and I can prove to you in any environment, not here, email me, how your data is inaccurate and is manipulated for your purpose. And just in 1998...
Excuse me. No, I'm going to address that because you're saying it's my data,
Hold on.
and it's not my data, it's the state's data.
Hold on, Jim. Let me just...
So,
Representative, could you just make the question
if you're
and
going to be
make a statement?
insulting, let's go that route, but if you want to have a conversation, I'm happy to have it.
Please make your question without making a statement according to what you believe they may be stating.
1988, since 2016, thanks to the law that was implemented back then, reduced substantially the suicide rate in the state of Massachusetts. Back then, we didn't have
No.
2000, the terrorist attack, we didn't have COVID, and we're still taking bodies out from the Mississippi River that were killed in that period that never got registered, and we don't have statistics about those. So, how come your data here doesn't match any data for any respectable source that we can find at the federal level or state level?
This is state data. All the data that I just gave you, which actually proves that suicide by guns barely dropped 5% in the 25 years. This data, it's not a study, it's not statistics, it's hard numbers, comes directly from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Their injury surveillance survey program they've been doing, I think, since 1994. It's available for anybody to look up. All you have to do is look up that system, and every year, and they're always, 2 years behind or so, they report every kind of death in Massachusetts, whether it's accidental, whether it's homicide, whether it's suicide, and that's where these numbers come from. It's not a statistic. They didn't survey 100 people and come up with these numbers. These are the numbers that are reported to the state itself. So it's not my stuff to gin up anything. These are the hard numbers. There has not been a drop in accidental deaths because we didn't have a problem. There's barely been a drop in suicide by handguns according to the state data, but that's been taken up by suicide by hanging, which has skyrocketed. And as far as homicide with guns, again, state data, not our stats, it's increased 111% since 1998. And I'm going to tell you, that number would be a lot higher if it wasn't for our really superb trauma centers, because those people, since the wars, have really learned how to save lives. That number would probably be even doubled if it wasn't for those trauma centers. So it's not our numbers. We're not convoluting anything to prove our point. We're trying to get the state to wake up and understand that it's not working. That
Thank you.
our people are suffering, the people out there are suffering, and neither one should be happening.
Thank you.
Well, like you say, the suicide by gun have increased in the state of Massachusetts, and that number contribute to the number of murders that we have right now. And the increase, according to you, is linked to more suicidal, no, to people that obtain weapons and kill somebody for that reason. So you say it. The numbers, the statistics have increased because more people commit suicidal, and we have gone through several traumatic events in the country, and the Commonwealth, including COVID. So, like I say, a statistic can be used, can be manipulated to fit a statement, and I believe this statistic needs to be reworked and be more realistic to what is happening right now.
I just don't know how many times I can correct you. It's not a statistic, it's data.
Okay.
There's a difference.
Thank you both. Jim, I think what you're saying is that there hasn't been, since that law, a decrease in suicide rates. Is that correct?
Suicide rates overall?
Right.
No.
No, okay.
No.
But has there been an increase in suicide with the use of weapons in the last 10 years?
No.
No, okay. Thank
No.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay,
But-
hearing no other
But in
questions.
fairness, though, in 1998, we had 1.5 million licensed gun owners. These numbers, we're less than half that. So actually, if you wanted to do statistics, the rates of suicide are higher per licensed gun owner now than they were 25 years ago.
Thank you.
Because we have far less gun owners.
That was exactly my point earlier. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Hearing no other questions, we'll move on to the next. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you for that.
I told you to bring a lunch.
Well,
Thank you.